Well, oh yes, we are recording this session today. And since we haven't been able to get out into the field the last couple of years, we decided to have some of these learning sessions, is what we're calling them, that are really geared towards USDA field personnel, and just going over the US Drought Monitor process and what it entails, and then answering questions that people may have. So the outline for this session, again, I'm going to ask you again, please introduce yourself in the chat box so we know who is participating today. You can just give your first and last name and what organization you're with. And also please mute your microphone unless you're speaking or asking a question, just to have less background interference. So what we're going to be covering today is the overview of the US Drought Monitor map and the process that we go into making that map. How can you contribute? There are several different ways to contribute to the making of this map. Some of them are more regular, what I call operational type of efforts, and others are when the occasion has merit to do so. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll cover all the questions and comments that you may have. If for some reason we do not cover everything in 1 hour, my contact information will be on my last slide, and you can email me your question, and I'll more than gladly be able to stay on past 1 hour for those of you that may have questions or want to take this discussion a little bit further, but I will be cognitive of time that we will plan on ending in 1 hour. So like I said, today's session is the first of 3 different learning sessions. All of these are going to be quite similar, but unique in that a different US Drought Monitor author from the National Drought Mitigation Center will be leading or presenting the 2 other ones in both June and July. So you can join all 3 if you want to see the different perspectives from 3 different authors, or just join in one. But if there's others that you think would be interested in participating in this, please share these links in the registration. We can send that out again through the different networks as we approach the other dates. And we are recording all 3 of these. I am going to wait until after the 3rd session in July is completed, and then we'll post all 3 recordings, and those can be shared as well. So stay tuned. There's going to be more information coming back on these. And again, I'm glad to have everyone who is joining us today. And just one more reminder to please introduce yourself in the chat so we can capture who is joining us today. So the US Drought Monitor has come from many different past efforts. In the past, we've used things like the Palmer Drought Index at the climate division or crop division level to identify drought. And this is going back to 1999 on this map. In late 1999, this idea of the US Drought Monitor came about. One of my colleagues here, the director of the Drought Mitigation Center, Dr. Mark Sabota, worked with Doug LeCompte at the Climate Prediction Center, and they came together with some different ideas that they both had, and that's really where the Drought Monitor was born, was some of the ideas that Mark and Doug had together. And the idea was this hybrid approach could be possible, and that's really what the Drought Monitor is taking, instead of just looking at single drought indicators or indices, we're taking a hybrid approach of combining them. So the US Drought Monitor has 2 different areas to it. There's an objective area where we're looking at the physical data and the indices, and we're looking at the data, basically what's going on. Then there's a subjective side to it. We have an email list server of 500 to 600 people that we are getting weekly feedback from. They're telling us what's going on in their backyard. And this is all done through an email list server. So when I'm leading the map for my week, I'm communicating with hundreds of people around the country that are not only providing feedback of what's going on in their local region, but they're also sharing data and giving a perspective that sometimes when you're looking at a national map, it may not necessarily be completely obvious that there could be some issues going on. And this is this hybrid approach of taking all the information, all the data that we have, and combining it into a single product, which is the US Drought Monitor map, instead of just looking at individual pieces of information. So this is the most recent map that came out last Thursday. It comes out every Thursday morning. A new map will come out tomorrow. And you know, the weekly map is a good way of showing these changes, both in areas that have improved or worsened in a short period of time. On the map, you see these different labels, these S's and L's, and that correlates to different time scales of potential impacts that we're looking at. In some cases, you see an S and L, and it's both a short and long-term type of drought situation. The NDMC is part of a three-way partnership in doing the drought monitor. We coordinate equally with USDA and NOAA in this three-way partnership that was developed from the beginning of the drought monitor process to get this map out every week. There's 10 to 12 million web hits every year, depending on if there's more or less drought. If there's a lot of drought going on like this year, those hits are going to definitely be more. If it's a quieter year with not as much drought, we'll probably only see 8 or 9 million hits. But a lot of people are coming to this website to get this information on the drought monitor each week. As many of you know, it's used in several USDA programs, and USDA has been incorporating the drought monitor into several new programs over the last couple of years as well. But other agencies like the IRS use it for tax deferral programs where livestock producers end up getting capital gains relief when they have to sell animals due to drought. And many other programs and organizations are using the drought monitor map as well to either within their state drought plans or to trigger other types of programs. And it's more than just the map. If you go to the National Drought, if you go to the Drought Monitor website, you will see that there's all sorts of data that go all the way back to the beginning of the map. So all the way back to 2000, you can get different time series and data, GIS files. If you like to work in GIS, there's data downloads and everything else that you see. There's actually an FSA eligibility tool for those that get questions about the livestock forage production program. You can go in there, put in your local grazing dates or your period of grazing period, and it will tell you your eligibility based on the different levels of that one LFP program. As many sometimes skip over, there is a narrative that goes along with this map that explains the changes that took place each week, and it's done on a regional basis. So you can get kind of a more localized synopsis of what was taking place. And just one example of something that was in the narrative, just talking about how rain fell across the region, and it allowed for improvements in some of the different indices and indicators we look at, and why changes were being made on that map. So sometimes the map by itself may not answer all the questions you may have, but looking at that narrative and the additional information that's provided in that narrative can help to explain why or why not the map changed the way it did. So in looking at the drought monitor map, there are 5 different intensity levels that are shown on the map, and 4 are considered drought and 1 is not. So abnormally dry is not considered drought on the map, but it is kind of that first indicator of going into drought. Or if we have had long-term drought and things have started to improve, it's kind of recognizing that not everything has completely improved yet, and still some issues or impacts with drought hanging on. And then we have the D1, D2, D3, and D4 drought from moderate, severe, extreme to exceptional. And then to the left, you can see that these were based off of different statistical categories. So D0 will happen about once every 3 to 5 years. D1 will happen in a region about once every 10 years, D2 about once every 20, D3 about once every 20 to 25 to 30 years, and D4 is quite rare. It should only be happening 1 to 2 times a century. Now, there are areas that if you are looking at localized drought and maybe just over the last couple of years, you've had D3 or D4 in an area for a long period of time. These statistics are not only looking at a broader region or a broader area, but also looking at if we were considering if we had 100 years of drought monitor data, this would be the frequency that should be expected over time. And so what do we use in putting together the drought monitor is we use these percentile rankings. The advantages of percentiles is they can be applied to any of our indicators, regardless of the period of record. So you may have 80 years of precipitation record, 50 years of soil stream flow record, and maybe only 30 years of soil moisture record. Well, you can still put each one of those indicators into the percentiles ranking category, and it correlates directly to the different DX levels D0 through D4 on the Drought Monitor map. And so what that's saying is abnormally dry, the majority of the indicators are falling into the 21st to 30th percentile. Moderate drought is the 11th to 20th percentile. Severe drought, the 6th to 10th. Extreme drought, D3, is the 3rd to 5th percentile. And D4, again, that 1st to 2nd percentile. So I know that the question of D3 comes up quite a bit. And so what this is saying is, if we had all the different data that we're looking at, the majority of those indicators are going to be falling into the 3rd to 5th percentile, meaning they're the 3rd to 5th driest ever for that location. And again, the period of record is important on some of these indicators, because the longer the period of record, the better climatology you have with them. What makes putting the Drought Monitor map a little bit more complex is that we're trying to show all these different types of drought on a single map. So we have meteorological, agricultural, hydrological, socioeconomic, and ecological drought issues that can develop anywhere in the country. Some of these can be separate from each other. Some of them can be happening at the same time. But the challenge is showing all of these on a single map. And so this happens quite often where an area that has been dry and we are seeing hydrological drought, maybe some ecological drought, or even agricultural drought. And then we have 2 or 3 weeks of good precipitation. We start seeing the changes in the drought indices, but we still have some long-term issues. So you may have improved meteorological, agricultural, and maybe even some of the ecological drought, but hydrologically speaking, there could still be some long-term issues that still haven't seen improvement. And so that is why we use the labels on the map, and that's also why we try to show all these different types of drought on a single map. But one of the keys that we don't try to do is just show the worst case scenario. We try to show what the majority of the indicators are showing, not just the best or not just the worst. So there are some objectives with the US Drought Monitor that we are trying to cover each week. And the key one is it's current conditions and current impacts. We're not projecting the map forward as a forecast, or we're not looking in a week or so. We're actually saying, if we're taking a snapshot of current conditions as they sit at this moment, this is what the map should look like. The US Drought Monitor is not a model. The Drought Monitor authors, we manually make that map each week, but we do start with the previous week's map. So we're not doing wholesale redraws each week, but what we're doing is taking that map, we're looking at all the different data, and then we're just adjusting those lines one way or the other based on the newest updates of data that we get each week. The US Drought Monitor map is not interpreting just precipitation. This is probably one of the bigger questions that comes up. Again, people will notice where it rained and didn't rain, but we're looking at many other indicators besides just precipitation. It's not a forecast or a drought declaration. So some states may use the Drought Monitor to trigger an official drought declaration that their governor has to approve. And it can be used by decision makers to declare droughts in a region. But it's not an official declaration of any kind. It's guidance to what those local decisions can be made from. And again, I mentioned it's not a forecast, that it's really a snapshot of conditions in time. When we're putting together the Drought Monitor map each week, we do not take into account any of the various relief programs that may be using the Drought Monitor to trigger them. The idea from those that have decided to use the Drought Monitor in this decision-making process is that they want an objective analysis of drought. And if they're going to start using these Drought Monitor products to trigger different relief programs, they want it to stay objective. So what that means is we are not taking into account any of these programs, because again, the program itself could be being triggered by the Drought Monitor. So again, we have an unbiased approach. I talked about the impact labels on the map a little bit. So basically, when we talk about short-term drought on the map, that's the S label. Long-term drought is the L, or it could be a combination of both short and long-term. And the timescales associated with these is typically short-term, we're looking at 6 months in time or less. Long-term is generally speaking 6 months or greater. And again, the time of year or the region could change that a little bit based on local climatology and what time of the year it is. We do incorporate that local expert into the making of the map. Not only do we talk through these emails, but we have phone calls with people sometime. And that information that those local experts are giving, I think one of the key things is it's helping to validate the data that we're using and pulling in each week to make that map. Again, we try to be as objective as possible as authors. I don't get a bonus or an extra bonus of any kind by showing more or less drought on the map, but we try to use this convergence of evidence approach. So I kind of relate it to a law trial where we start with all the data, all the information that we have, we start broadly, and then when we start narrowing down that information and data, what's it converging to? What's the DX level that it's telling us the majority of these indicators are pointing at? And what's even unique that even in some of the worst drought situations, not all the indicators are going to line up nicely as a D3 or D4 when you start looking at all of them. So you may have a D1, D2, D3, and D4 indicators. So that's where this convergence of evidence comes into play, that we're really trying to start broadly and then see where the majority of those pieces of data are falling. And that's how we can make that determination on the map. And that's the same methodology is used for all parts of the country. Because of the ranking percentiles, it does take into account the local climatology. So the dryness in the deserts of Arizona can be related equally to dryness in Florida based on percentiles that we're able to look at all these data side by side. The physical data, drought indices, and indicators must support the depiction on the map. And that kind of goes along with the last point here is impact data validates what we're seeing, but impact reports that we're receiving cannot change the map by itself. The physical data has to be what's supporting any changes, both worsening or improving on the map. One thing that happens is questions come up, well, hey, we had some dry conditions a couple months ago. Can we go back and make the changes on the map? And the answer to that is, and this has been from the beginning, that since we do have a weekly product, that there are ample opportunities to make changes, both improvements or degradation. So when the map is finalized and released on Thursday mornings, it is final. We don't ever go back and retroactively change anything. So now we'll get into the process of, how are people contributing and how is this information being shared? So there are some annual feedback forums associated with the Drought Monitor. We've had a US Drought Monitor forum every other year since 2000. The next one will be coming up in 23 again. Hopefully we can do that in person. There's different webinars and telecons that people have and can join in on. We also have several partners out there, such as the regional climate centers, those within the Weather Service, state climatologists, and within USDA, we have the FSA and NRCS folks that are out in the field. We have tribal input. We have different ways of reporting conditions and impacts through the Cocorahs or Seymour Reporting, which I'll get into a little bit of those a little bit later. And then in some areas, there are some state drought task force, and I listed some of the states here. These are coordinated efforts within a state where in many instances, it's being led by the state climate office, but not always, where they go out and collect information about impacts and different data and what's going on in their state. And they'll coordinate with several people within their state, put together recommendations and send those up directly to that week's author. So with supporting evidence and supporting information of why they're thinking the changes that they're presenting should be made. And the Drought Monitor author has the opportunity to use that information directly. And what's nice is these task force are coordinated, like I said, so they take over basically what's being suggested for an entire state or a region, which really helps in getting the map production done each week. So again, how is this all done? Well, we do have 9 currently, a 10th author just started here recently. And we have 1 author out at the Desert Research Institute in Reno. We have 3 authors at the National Drought Mitigation Center here in Lincoln. We have 1 author at NCEI in Asheville, North Carolina, and a new author just got on board here just in the last couple of weeks, so that will be changing to 2. And then the other 4 authors are within Washington, D.C. area, 1 within USDA, and 3 within the CPC area. And what it says here that we all need to work at a regional or national center or an academia or research. And we're all volunteers. What this means is that outside of doing our drought monitoring work and putting the map together, we typically will do a 2-week shift and then pass it on to the next author, that we have regular jobs besides what we do with the drought monitor. So that's kind of what it means when I say we're all volunteers. So when we start looking at the data that goes into the drought monitor, there's a lot of information. So anything from drought indices to different types of soil moisture products, to hydrology data with stream flows, reservoirs, and wells, remotely sensed data, precipitation and snow again is a big one, as well as expert local input. Most of the information we analyze each week falls into one of these categories. And roughly we go over 40 to 50 unique indicators every week. And many of those have different timescales that are associated with them as well. So even that number is much larger than just those unique pieces of data. And all areas are represented. And some of those pieces of data are going to cover some areas better than others, but especially with the advent of some of the more recent information and data that we do have high resolution coverage of the entire country with various products each week. So what we're trying to do with the drought monitor is really look at the water balance equation. So types of snowpack, atmospheric moisture, soil moisture and groundwater, stored moisture, rivers and stream flows, vegetation health, and each one of those goes to a different time scale. So we're looking at things, daily. Where did it rain last night or the night before? And then we have other information that's on a weekly, monthly, seasonal, annual, or even multi-annual or interannual type of time scale. And we're looking at all those different time scales because just because conditions may be wet or dry in a daily or weekly time scale, there could be monthly or seasonal issues that we need to address on the map that just aren't coming up with the shortest time scales. So again, we're trying to look at all these different types of data through various time scales. I mentioned this a little bit, but the emerging satellite products and some of the model products have really been an advantage to us over the last decade or so. And what some of these are trying to do are identify specific aspects of this water cycle. So evapotranspiration, rainfall, vegetation health, soil moisture, groundwater, snow cover. Satellites can do a good job, especially at this very high resolution delivery that they do provide. And some of the examples of some of these tools are at the bottom. And you can see that each one of these is a very high resolution product that is showing at least the lower 48 in very high resolution. And these are coming out each week now. And again, along with some of our other data sets, these satellite tools have really been good to fill in some of these data sparse areas that we know exist. So the authors don't just have a single map that we work through and provide at the end of the week. We go through several different drafts, and these are shared through that email list server, and we incorporate the feedback that we get from those drafts. And this is done through hundreds of emails. So basically the map production will start on Monday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, about where we're at now, the author for that week will be tying those things up and getting the final map approved and writing that narrative. But during this time, we'll see 3, 4, sometimes even 5 drafts of changes that are being made. And when there's a really active drought period, the author may touch 30 to 40 different states with changes in any given week. So it can be quite busy, but we do have this good network, this drought community, I'd call it, that contributes to the making of the map with the lead author gathering all that information. And so when we come down to it, this came out last summer. I had a partner out in the Weather Service in the Western US. She brought this term, the Drought Machine. And she really was thinking of the Drought Monitor as this drought machine where the authors are trying to wrangle in all this data and different information from all over the country in the given week and put it together in a single map. And I thought that was a really good analogy of really what we are doing, that the authors, their name's on the map, there's a single name on each map, and they're responsible for what comes out that week. And that includes being able to explain what comes out on that map each week. So I've been an author now for almost 18 years. And when I put the map together, I pretty much want to say that if someone calls me up, regardless of where they're from, and wants me to justify why the map looks the way it does in their area, I should be able to explain exactly why and support it with data. So the US map is the end product. US Drought Monitor map is the end product, but the process is what makes the US Drought Monitor what it is. And it is the gold standard of drought monitoring in the United States and around the world. And we just need to trust this process. So the last couple minutes here, I'm going to talk about how people can participate in the various ways to participate. So I mentioned this email list server. This is open to, I won't say anyone, but if you are within agency or group that wants to contribute to the making of the map each week. So the people on this listserv, they're the ones that are providing data, providing analysis, critiquing the drafts, maybe participating in one of those state level task force. But you can see on this map, there's 441 people, and I'm going to use Montana as an example. Even though there's 9 people in Montana listed, I know that there are 20, 30, maybe even 40 people that talk about conditions each week and then send up a single recommendation for the state. So those 9 people are actually probably 4 or 5 times more than that, quite easily. You can see in the lower right-hand side too, the different organizations that are participating. So, right now, NOAA with the Weather Service, since we do have Weather Service offices around the country, they're making up over half of the subscribers to this email list server. We do have some within USDA. We have 19 people. I'd like to see that number higher. And you can see the other agencies as well, about a quarter, a little over a quarter are within academia, and those are some of the state climate offices and research centers. But again, on the upper right-hand level, if you're interested in the week-to-week production and participating in that week-to-week production, send me an email, or if you have questions about what this email list server looks like or what really goes on with it, I can talk to you about it. I oversee it, so I can add you to that if you'd like. The idea is really, this is where the drought community comes together, and people know what's going on in their backyards, and they know about the data that they're looking at. And so having this email list server with hundreds of emails, I will say that between Monday and Wednesday, a lot of traffic through this email list, but it is really one of the key components besides the data of us putting together the drought monitor. So I talked about some of these state task force and different regional teams. Anyone can have the opportunity to participate in those. If you're unsure about what's taking place in your part of the country, again, let me know. I can connect you with who I think would be the best person to get in contact with to maybe join one of these groups. Cocorahs Observers. I know many of you know what Cocorahs is. Not only can Cocorahs Observers record precipitation to help fill in some of the gaps where we have precipitation data, but they can also do condition monitoring reports, basically saying how wet or dry they think it is. Again, a personal perspective in their area. At the NDMC, we have these condition monitoring observation reports, or Seymour, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Seymour on another slide. And also, people always want to share pictures. So we do have this system that was started at the Skip Risa down in Oklahoma several years ago, and they shifted it up to us. But 4 or 5 times a year, we'll ask people to go out and take pictures in all the different cardinal directions and submit them, basically as a baseline of, when it is wet or when it is dry, this is what the area should look like. And pictures do a good job of showing some of the impact of dryness and wetness in a region. So the authors will use this information, and again, it's open to anyone, and it is public, and the best thing about it is it all gets archived. 5 or 10 years ago, we really didn't know that how much this information would be used, but after it resonates for a while and you kind of forget about it or you move on to the next drought, having a way to go back in these archives and look at some of the issues or the levels of dryness that were being observed is quite useful, especially when you're trying to compare one drought episode to another. So we have this drought impacts toolkit, and that URL is quite easy, droughtImpacts.unl.edu. And that's where you can get into that condition monitoring observations form and submit your information there. We have a drought impact reporter and then this visual drought atlas. If you just want to submit pictures, probably the visual drought atlas is the way to go. If you want to give more commentary on the conditions that you're seeing, and you can or you don't have to submit photos with that, but the Seymour reporting system is key for that. The drought impact reporter pretty much now is relegated to pulling drought related stories from media sources. So this is just an example of the Seymour reporting from 2020. Each one of those dots is where we had a report, and the map is actually interactive. So if you would hover over one of these dots, you would be able to see what was submitted at that point in time. And you can see on the far right-hand side, there is a scale of dryness. So these people are using this scale to determine how wet or dry it is. You see a lot of this comes in when it's dry, but it would be great to see these when it's wet as well. And so this is one of the tools, and you can see up above the map the different tabs. And so you can, if you have a crop related condition report you want to provide, you can not only submit it that way, but then you can go back and look at all the different crop reports or livestock or wildlife or household or power, etc. And again, pictures are encouraged, but they're not required on this system. Those that are familiar with Cocorahs, there's a similar system, and we're the Seymour reporting system and the Cocorahs reporting system kind of work together. And again, you can see from severely wet to severely dry. These are coming from Cocorahs Observers that are talking about what they're observing in their backyard or in their region based on their knowledge of the area. And so one thing I really encourage Cocorahs to not only help fill in some of the reporting information gaps that are out there, but also to do these condition observations and share those as often as they want. And again, I really stress folks to do this both in good and bad times, so we have this baseline of what we should expect conditions to be. The Visual Drought Atlas, again, you can submit photos, and you can go back and search for photos too. So these are set up by state and different years, so you can go and search if you know they're, if you're down in Texas and you're looking at the 2015 or 2016 drought, was there any photos in the archive here? And again, photos can really tell a story of just that level of dryness compared to what normal conditions could look like. And again, this is the Drought Impact Reporter. This is the longest running tool that we have, and this does go all the way back to the early 2000s. And again, there are different categories: ag, fire, relief, water, business, industry, plants and wildlife, tourism, and rec. And you can go in and look and see at these various media reports of drought impacts that came across various news sources. So with that, my contact information is up here, and I will leave that up there for a little bit. Again, for those that came late, please use the chat room to introduce yourself and what agency you're with. I see we have a little bit over 100 participants here this afternoon, so that is great. And with that, I will ask Tanya, who's helping me here at the NDMC, if there's been any questions in the chat, but we'll be opening up to questions now for the last part of the session. Thank you.
So Brian, we have 2 questions so far. Are there any opportunities for more on-the-ground evapotranspiration data, eddy flux towers?
Yeah, so for any data that is not being collected, so that's probably one part of the talk I kind of skipped over in saying that the US Drought Monitor authors, we are definitely consumers of data. None of the data that we utilize do we produce. And so really it would have to go conversations with those agencies that either sponsor the current networks that are out there, or either working with some of the states that have mesonets and trying to get more of that information onto their platforms that currently exist, or even news stations. The problem is with news stations, they are costly, and maintaining them over the long term is probably the most expensive aspect of running any network or any type of mesonet, is the proper calibration, maintenance, and data storage is quite costly over time. But That's probably a question we could address more offline. If you had more details of what you're exactly looking for, shoot me an email and we can try to help work through that.
And then the other question was, is the PowerPoint presentation going to be available?
Yeah, so we are, like I said, we are recording all these. And so after the last session in July, we will share all of the recordings along with the PowerPoint that the Drought Monitor author who's presenting provides. I will say that each one of our talks will be similar but different. So by the middle of July, when we get done with the last session, we should have all 3 recordings and all 3 PowerPoints, and we'll post them. And for anyone who is registered, we will send out an email also sharing where that information can be found. So those were the 2 questions in chat. I'll have Tanya just keep watching chat if people want to put any questions in there. If you do have another question for me, please unmute yourself and we can address those with the remaining time.
With the Western US getting increasingly drier, does that change how the NDMC categorizes the levels and lengths of droughts out there? And how often does it change?
Yeah, that's a great question, Frank. And, you know, through the process of using the percentile rankings, the dryness that we are incorporating does get recognized, you know, especially the last decade or so, where we've seen a great deal of the West be quite dry. That a drought that maybe that we categorized as a D3 in the early 2000s may only rank now as a D2 drought if we went back and analyzed the data. So the ranking percentiles methodology does incorporate that into the analysis. And you're right, are we seeing changes to the point that, again, not all 2 droughts are created equally, but these drier periods, especially compared to historical periods, it's becoming more commonplace to see this dryness, especially over the extended period of time. So the methodology that the Drought Monitor authors are using, I guess in essence does capture that, but we also know that in a changing climate, one of the factors that has been brought up is an increase in both severity and frequency of some of these episodes, which I think is exactly what we have seen on the US Drought Monitor recently.
Okay, the next one, in mountain states where snowpack supplies a significant amount of moisture, how do you differentiate between the mountain locations with snowpack and plains areas that use that moisture as stream flow in making drought categorizations?
Yeah, Russ, that's a good question. So basically we look at the source region. We don't look at you know, river water in the Colorado River that originates in Colorado and is being used in Southern California. We're basically looking at those snow-tell sites, where they're located, and that goes into the analysis for those locations. Water supply issues are definitely being addressed by other tools and products. I know the National Water Monitor that's been getting spun up the last couple of years is definitely taking into account some of these source region versus use region questions. And hopefully that better suits not only some of these discussions, but gives people a better idea of where that water use is compared to where it originates.
And the next one is, a Drought Monitor author a person or organization?
Yeah, so the Drought Monitor authors are people. I showed the organizations that we all come from the Desert Research Institute, the National Drought Mitigation Center, NCEI, CPC, and USDA. So those are the organizations that are the home agencies to the Drought Monitor authors. But each one of the authors operates as an individual, and they do their weekly analysis on their own.
Is USDM data set derived from the grid met by UC Merced?
No, the USDM data set is derived from the weekly analysis that's being done. Again, it's not a model that the different shapes that we have for the different D0 through D4 layers is constructed each week by the author, and that is where the US Drought Monitor data itself comes from.
Okay, so that same person said when I reclassified, Seymour said PDSI data using the same ranges, D0 to D4, I didn't as much as D4 as you showed in your presentation.
And that's because any one of these single drought indices could give you a different answer versus the hybrid approach of combining the best attributes of several dozen drought indices and indicators to put together a single map. You can go through and find cases where there may be conditions better or worse. Again, that's this convergence of evidence and looking at all the data versus just deciding which piece of information is going to handle all drought areas, all instances equally over time.
Right now, that's all the questions I'm seeing. Mark did comment when you were talking a bit ago that, you know, there's more of a water scarcity issue too, not just drought, which is very true.
I know many of the questions that come in to those within FSA definitely are dealing with the different programs that are being triggered by the Drought Monitor. So the goal is to at least give people enough information that they feel comfortable answering those questions. I will say that if questions do come in and you don't feel comfortable answering those, please reach out to myself or one of the other Drought Monitor authors, as we would be happy to assist in answering some of these questions, because I know sometimes producers or different stakeholders will come and have specific questions, you know, some of which we're seeing here on this webinar, and they'll come with similar types of questions, and you may not feel comfortable answering those, but feel free to reach out. I know all the authors, our information is available online. The link has been shared in the chat box here to all the different authors, and we're quite open about talking about the process and what we do, and also sharing our knowledge of how the map's put together. So Mark Brusberg put in the chat, and Mark's the chief meteorologist for USDA in the Office of the Chief Economist. He said, the only current author is Brad Rippey from USDA, who works in the World Ag Outlook Board under the Office of the Chief Economist. He said, however, we'd be happy to have more agency participation if there are any qualified persons who would like to pitch in. And yes, that's a great point, Mark. We're actively always recruiting authors. And if you're interested in that, please reach out to Mark Brusberg or Brad Rippey within USDA, or reach out to me directly, as I talk and work with Brad and Mark quite intimately throughout the year.
I do have another one here, Brian, that you can't see. It came directly to me. One of the first maps in your presentation showed high amounts of moisture in the western states, lots of green. Can you go over that slide again?
Yeah, some of those slides have been recycled over time, and they probably haven't been updated. So that would probably be why you were seeing what you were seeing. The data on all the slides that I was showing, not all of them were current conditions, I'll say that. It was just giving an idea of the types of data that we can use. And
also, generally, are the drought monitors economists or meteorologists?
Most everyone working on the US Drought Monitor map as an author has a climate or meteorology background, or both. All the authors do. Many of those that are contributing, I would say a vast majority are either meteorologists or climatologists, but we also have hydrologists. There are some economic people that follow and contribute, but I would say most are physical scientists.
And Bruce, we appreciate your comment. Bruce said, we at FSA appreciate having a single resource tool for program determination need when before it would take much time and many data resources to make similar program implementation decisions. Thank you for your work. We appreciate that.
Yeah, Bruce, that's a good point. Prior to the Drought Monitor, it was kind of piecemeal on putting data together to try and get some programs going. And going back to the early 2000s again, when USDA had the excess of dried milk in storage that wasn't fit for human consumption, it was one of the first uses of the Drought Monitor and triggering some relief to livestock producers that could feed their animals this dried milk that had kind of gone out of date. So, I personally feel that the Drought Monitor is the best tool out there to trigger any of these programs because of the objectiveness and unbiased nature to it. Plus, it does take into account all the different data and information that's out there and not just looking at a single indicator or indice that will work in all instances.
And then Mark, our boss, Mark, wanted you to remind us as to what the USDA participant percentage is on the drought listserv. And he said it'd be great to have more participation on the USDA front.
Yeah, so right now USDA makes up about 4% of those who are registered to be on the listserv. And it would be great to get more folks within USDA as part of the weekly production of the Drought Monitor. You all are scattered around the country and know your backyards just as good as anyone. And I'd love to have more of you on the official US Drought Monitor listserv and participating in that weekly production of the map. I pulled up that slide again, and my email's in the upper right-hand corner to email me. I can get you signed up, but you can see the makeup in the lower right of the agencies that are part of the roster of the US Drought Monitor listserv.
Mark Rusberg also tagged onto that and said observations at USDA field offices would also help a great deal, including photos, descriptions of the impacts on crops and forage, etc.
No, you're exactly right, Mark. Using some of the different tools that I gave brief introductions to today with the drought, the Visual Drought Atlas, the Seymour, and even those that work with different stakeholders on Cocorahs, those are all great opportunities to participate in the process of the Drought Monitor without officially being on the email listserv. And again, it's open to anyone, it's public. The Drought Monitor authors really have the opportunity to go and look at this information and again, validates the different data sets that we're looking at.
That's all the questions in the chat right now.
Well, we do have about 10 more minutes. So if there's anything that I did talk about, again, I went through some of these slides quite quickly. If there's anything that you would like me to go back and address again or a little bit more detail, I'll gladly do that for you because, again, if some of you are only hearing this for the first time, it does take a while to see all this information really sink in. I will add, and maybe I'll have Tanya share it in the chat box, we do have a really nice online tutorial that basically covers everything I went over today. It has different chapters on it, and you can go through it at your own pace and take notes, but it is on the US Drought Monitor website. And I'll have Tanya share that in the chat. And to me, it's a really good resource for folks to go and either share with stakeholders or different people within their agencies, but also themselves to get a better idea of what the Drought Monitor is and is not trying to do. So if there is anything that you would like me to go over again, I think maybe this was the map. Someone was saying that it looked green out in the west. I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, it was one of these slides. But again, some of these have not been updated across the bottom. Some of those are from 2014. And on this slide here, some of these are quite old as well. It's just showing an example of the different types of tools and products that the Drought Monitor authors are getting each week. I will say I skimmed this over as well during the presentation, but the work is done all in ArcGIS. So the authors, back in the day, we were printing out maps and we were eyeballing the maps and trying to draw the lines. And we've improved upon that greatly over the last 15 years or so. We bring all these data sets right into a GIS program, and we have the drought monitor layers as well as the different data layers, and we can turn them off and on and adjust the lines exactly to where the data are. And that's been a big advent in the advancement of the drought monitor, is being able to bring these data into a GIS format. So any other questions for me? You can put them in the chat or unmute yourself. I know Mark and Mark are both on. If you want to unmute yourself and add anything as well, it's great to have both of you on. Mark Sabota, the director of the Drought Mitigation Center, and Mark Brusberg, the chief meteorologist at USDA.
Brian, this is Mark Brusberg. I want to thank you very much for providing this opportunity to the USDA folks who are interested in hearing about this, but also, as we've already seen mentioned, FSA and other agencies are really dependent upon the US Drought Monitor for their programmatic response. So it's good that everybody has this, I get documentation, if you will, or reference as to what the drought monitor really is. So if they do get questions from their customers, they can answer them with a little more confidence, or they will know who can answer their questions. So again, this is very very much appreciated, and I wasn't kidding. If there's anybody out in the field who is in a state experiencing drought like Texas or California or one of the other states that are just, you know, modeled with red and orange, take a picture, send it to Brian's team through the Drought Impact Reporter. That makes a big difference, and it does help the authors do, you know, get as good a look as possible on what's going on in your areas, and that does help your customers as well. And so thanks again, Brian, Tanya, and everybody else at NDMC who put this together.
No, we appreciate that, Mark, and you're right. The more eyes and ears on the ground that we have, the better things will be. And again, the goal of everyone involved in the Drought Monitor is to have the most accurate map as possible. And again, 9 people can't do it by themselves, being the authors, but there is this drought community and has grown tremendously over the years and continues to grow. And I think there is ample opportunity for participation in many different ways. And Mark mentioned the drought impact reporting tools that we have, and I did put a link to the drought impacts page at the University of Nebraska at the NDMC, where you can go in and do some of those submissions that I talked about through the Visual Drought Atlas or Seymour or the other tools. Well, with that, we will be sharing this information in July. If there's a need to have it prior, reach out to me and let me know. It's not like it's in an embargo or anything. I'd be glad to share it prior, but I just had planned on releasing it after the 3 learning sessions were done. Again, the next one is set up to be June 23rd at 2 to 3 p.m. Central Time. And the NDMC will be leading that one again as well. And like I said, with the different authors, you're going to get a similar message, but a different perspective, because we do things similar but different at times. So again, having that perspective from different people is always beneficial. And I know I learn a lot from the other authors as well. So again, thank you today for taking your time. Thank you to Mark Brusberg and USDA for sponsoring this work and getting it out to everyone through the Office of the Chief Economist. We appreciate that as well. So I'll hang around here a little bit, but we'll sign off officially and stop recording. And if you have a question or comment, put it in the chat or unmute yourself, but that will end today's session. Thank you.